You ever have one of those neighbors that makes you question every decision you've ever made, especially the one to move into your neighborhood in the first place? Because, yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. I thought I had it all figured out. Nice house, quiet street, a decent view, and enough space for a small garden and a backyard grill. Simple things. Peace. Privacy. But that was before I met her. We're talking about the queen of entitled behavior. The human version of a parking ticket. Her name's not really Karen, obviously, but let's be honest. If the shoe fits, it's probably stolen from someone else's porch. Now, let me take you back a little. I live in a small neighborhood managed by an HOA. And yes, I know, HOAs are already a nightmare. If you've ever dealt with one, you already know they'll write you up for having your trash bins visible for more than 6 seconds after pickup day. Or send warning letters because your grass is 0.2 inches taller than regulation height. They're not exactly known for being reasonable. But despite the strict rules, I liked my house. It had a 2-car garage, and most importantly, I installed a private EV charger in my driveway, specifically for my new electric car. Took a little effort to get it approved, but it was worth it. I even got it wired directly to my meter. Paid out of pocket for everything. My property, my equipment, my electricity. Now here's where things get weird. About 3 weeks after I installed the charger, I noticed something odd. One morning, I'm heading out early, and I see a Tesla parked in my driveway. Not my car. A white Model 3. Just chilling there like it belonged. At first, I figured it was a delivery guy turning around, or maybe someone lost. But then I got closer, and I saw the cable plugged into the car. My charger. Being used. Without my permission. I stood there for a second, kind of stunned. I mean, who does that? Who just walks onto someone else's property and plugs in their car like it's a public charging station? At that point, I didn't even know whose car it was. I looked around, waited a minute to see if anyone showed up. Nothing. So I unplugged it. Simple. I didn't touch the car, didn't damage anything, just pulled the cable and left a small sticky note on the windshield. I wrote, "Private property. Do not use this charger. This is not public. Thanks." Polite, right? Later that day, I came home and the car was gone. Charger untouched. No sign of drama. I figured it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone thought it was okay. Maybe a guest of a neighbor. Whatever. I let it go. But then, 2 days later, it happened again. Same car. Same spot. Same unauthorized charging. But this time, no note. No hesitation. Just bold as anything. Plugged in like they had every right in the world. Now I was irritated. I unplugged it again, but this time I didn't leave a note. I knocked on a few doors to ask around and finally got an answer from a guy across the street. He says, "Oh yeah, that's probably Melissa. She lives 2 houses over on the corner. She's the HOA secretary. She's got that Tesla." Melissa. Okay, now we have a name. So I walk over there, knock on her door, and she answers like I'm the one disturbing her. She gives me this big fake smile, like the kind of smile people give when they're trying to hide the fact that they're ready to throw hands. I say, "Hey, I think your Tesla's been charging on my driveway." And she just blinks at me. "Oh, that was you?" she says, like I was the one out of line. "I didn't think you'd mind. It's just a little electricity." Just a little electricity. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know about this woman. The entitlement was practically leaking out of her pores. I told her as politely as I could, "It's not a public charger. I paid for the installation, the equipment, and the electricity. Please don't use it again." And you know what she says? Well, the HOA guidelines don't say anything about neighbors sharing chargers. And since it's not locked up or gated, I figured it was a community resource. I swear I almost lost it right there. But I kept calm. I told her again, clearly this time, that it was private. It was tied directly to my electricity bill. I even offered to show her the permit and installation receipts if she had any doubts. But she just sort of shrugged and said, "Well, if it's that big a deal to you," like I was the one being difficult. I walked away thinking that was the end of it. I figured I'd made myself clear.
Problem solved, right? Wrong.
Because just 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, I wake up, make coffee, and look out the window. And guess what I see? You already know. That same white Tesla, once again plugged into my charger like it pays rent. This time, I snapped a photo. Actually, a whole bunch. From different angles. Date and timestamps included. Then I unplugged it again and walked straight to the HOA office, which, conveniently, is just around the block. And guess who was on duty that day?
Yep.
Melissa. Sitting there behind the desk like she didn't just violate every basic boundary of neighborly behavior. I calmly showed her the photos. I explained the situation again. And she just smirked. Actually smirked. Well, if you're going to leave the charger accessible, she said, you can't blame me for assuming it's for neighborhood use. You should put up a sign or something.
A sign.
Really? Let me just take a moment here to say, this woman worked for the HOA. The same HOA that fined my neighbor $100 for painting their mailbox the wrong shade of gray. The same HOA that once issued a formal warning because someone parked too close to a hydrant, even though the car was only there for 6 minutes.
But now?
Suddenly we're all relaxed about rules and property lines? It was beyond frustrating. I asked her directly, twice, to agree in writing that she would no longer use my charger. She refused. She said the HOA would have to review the matter. And since she was the one taking notes and reviewing the matter, I didn't exactly feel confident anything would happen. I left that office more annoyed than I'd been in a long time. And sure enough, next week it happened again. Only this time, it wasn't just the car. I actually saw her do it. I was home on a random Thursday afternoon, working in the garage with the door open. And here comes Melissa, strolling down the sidewalk like she's on a casual walk, extension cable in hand, like she's about to plug in her blender at a Starbucks. She sees me, stops and goes, "Oh, I didn't realize you were home." And I just stared at her. "You were about to plug in, weren't you?" I asked. And she had the nerve to act surprised. "I figured you wouldn't mind. It's just for a bit. I've got an appointment later, and I'm kind of low on charge." I couldn't believe it. At this point, I was done being polite. I told her, flat out, "If you plug into my charger again, I will take further action. You are not entitled to my electricity. This is theft, plain and simple." She just kind of huffed and walked away, muttering something about people being so uptight these days. That night, I started doing research. Because clearly, being direct wasn't working. Talking to her didn't help. The HOA wasn't going to lift a finger. And I was sick of being the only one playing by the rules. I wanted to stop this from happening permanently. So I started looking into my options. Legal ones, technical ones. Things that would protect my property without crossing any lines. I wasn't interested in getting sued or starting a war with my neighbors, but I also wasn't going to let some entitled Tesla driver steal from me with a smile on her face. And let's just say, I found some very interesting solutions. Solutions that were completely legal, totally within my rights, and very, very effective. But I'll get to that in a minute. Because the next time she tried to charge her car, let's just say it didn't go how she expected. So there I was, sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop, going down a rabbit hole of home electrical systems and anti-theft solutions. I'd never been the techie revenge type, but after getting stepped on by this HOA Tesla thief 3 times in a row, something in me snapped. And let me be clear, I wasn't looking to hurt anyone. I didn't want damage. I didn't want drama. I wanted deterrence. Simple and loud. The more I read, the more I realized how many people had gone through the same thing. EV charger theft, power leeching, friendly neighbors who thought they were owed free energy just because they lived within a few hundred feet. One guy even caught a stranger using his outdoor outlet to charge a power tool for a whole week while building a fence. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just my problem. This was a thing. Anyway, back to my charger. I talked to a local electrician I trusted. I explained the situation. He didn't laugh. He didn't think I was overreacting. In fact, he'd heard similar stories before. He said the smartest move: install a switch, a hidden one, inside the garage, tied directly to the power source. When it's off, the charger's dead. It looks connected, but it's completely off. No electricity flows through. He also mentioned a secondary option, a programmable timer box. You set specific hours when power is allowed to flow. Outside those hours, nothing. Even if someone plugs in, they're not getting anything. Smart, right? So, we installed both. The switch was hidden behind a wall panel inside my garage. Flip it, and the charger's live. Flip it again, and it's a fancy-looking decoration with 0 voltage. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to make a point. Something undeniable. Something that said, hey, I know what you're doing, and I'm not playing anymore. So, I took it one step further. No, I didn't fry her car. I didn't send dangerous current through anything. But what I did do was install a simple upgrade that added a surge protector between the outlet and the charger. But not just any surge protector. This one triggered a high-pitched alarm if voltage draw exceeded a set amount without proper input authentication. Meaning, if I wasn't the one plugging in my vehicle, the system would scream. And boy, was it loud. Not dangerous. Just annoying. Think smoke detector, but sharper. Think car alarm, but higher frequency. Then I waited.
3 days later, it happened.
I was inside eating lunch, watching a rerun, not even thinking about Melissa at that point. But suddenly from the garage, that alarm shrieked through the walls like a banshee on caffeine. I ran to the garage, flipped the panel, and opened the door just in time to see her yanking the charger from her car like she'd been caught robbing a bank. Her face? Pure panic, mixed with shock. Like she'd just touched a live wire, which she hadn't, because again, safety first. The charger didn't have power. The system was offline. But that sound told her everything. And she wasn't ready for it. She saw me, froze, then muttered, "Is that your alarm?" I said, "Nope. That's your conscience screaming." Okay, I didn't actually say that. I just said, "Yes, it's mine. And now you know this charger is off limits." She tried to play it cool. "Oh, well, it didn't even work," she said, shrugging. "You don't have to make such a big deal about it." Then she had the audacity to say, "Maybe you should just leave it unlocked so others can use it. It's the neighborly thing to do." That was the moment I knew this woman lived in a completely different reality. A place where other people's stuff was hers by default. A place where rules were optional if you were important enough. Like a self-declared VIP of the cul-de-sac. But she didn't realize that I wasn't bluffing anymore. I said, "Melissa, if you plug into my charger again, I'm filing a police report. This is not a gray area. This is theft. And I have video, photos, and logs. All time-stamped." She didn't say anything. Just turned and walked back to her house.
Fast.
Not quite running, but close. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. Spoiler, it wasn't. Because 2 days later, I got a letter. From the HOA. Signed by the president himself. Apparently, Melissa had filed a complaint against me for having an unsafe and unregulated charging station on my property. She claimed it caused a disruptive noise event and potentially posed a hazard to the neighborhood. Yup. You can't make this stuff up. Now, I'm not dumb. I know HOAs have politics. Melissa was the secretary, which meant she had friends on the board. I figured they'd try to pull something shady. Maybe push for a safety inspection, or fine me over made-up violations. But what she didn't count on. I had receipts. Literal ones. Install permits. Contractor approval forms. County inspection clearance. Even a certificate from the utility company confirming the system was up to code. I made copies of everything. I showed up to the next HOA meeting early, dressed like I was going to court.
Calm. Prepared.
And I brought them a complaint of my own. See, I had filed a police report. Theft of services. Documented. I had the evidence printed and ready. Every time she'd used the charger without permission, I'd calculated the power draw. I knew exactly how many kilowatts she'd stolen. It wasn't much money, maybe $30 total, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the line.
Cross it and you pay.
The HOA president took one look at my file, flipped through the pages, and let out a sigh. Not dramatic. Just exhausted. Then he said, We'll review both complaints and get back to you. A week passed. Then I got another letter. This one was different. No threats. No accusations. Just a notice stating that unauthorized use of residential electrical installations is not permitted under HOA policy, and residents are reminded to respect private property. That was it. No apology. No direct mention of Melissa. But from that day on, her Tesla never showed up in my driveway again. No more cords. No more surprises. Just peace. For a while. Because the truth is, people like that, they don't stop. They just shift. And Melissa? She was just getting started. So I thought it was over. No more Tesla in my driveway. No more alarms. No more awkward encounters across the street. Melissa seemed to back off, and I figured she finally got the message. That I wasn't a doormat. That this charger didn't come with an open to public sign. For a few days, things were quiet. Peaceful even. But when you're dealing with someone like Melissa, peace is just the calm before another wave of nonsense. It started small. Passive-aggressive, even. First, it was a note in my mailbox. No envelope. No signature. Just a folded-up piece of paper that said, "It must be nice to keep all that power to yourself while the planet burns." Really? That's the angle she picked now? Suddenly, I'm the villain for not letting someone steal from me? I threw it in the trash. Didn't even get mad. Just shook my head and moved on. Then came the garden thing. One morning, I went outside and noticed someone had trampled the edge of my flower bed. Not destroyed. Just enough to be annoying. A few stems broken. Footprints in the soil. A small solar light knocked over. Coincidence? Maybe. But the timing? A little too perfect. Still, no proof. No cameras pointing that way.
Nothing to act on.
But it didn't stop. A few days later, I got a reminder letter from the HOA. This time, it wasn't about the charger.
It was about my trash bins.
Apparently, they were visible from the street for longer than the allotted period. Which is funny, because I take them in religiously. Like, within an hour of pickup. I started to realize what was happening. She couldn't steal my power anymore. So now she was trying to drain something else, my patience. Slow little jabs. Annoyances. HOA technicalities. Neighborhood pettiness. And she was doing it behind the scenes. No confrontation. No more showing up in my driveway with a charging cable. Now it was quiet sabotage. The kind that eats away at you until you snap and look like the bad guy. Classic HOA warfare. So I adapted. I installed a second camera. This one pointed toward the front yard, where the garden is. Caught a cat once. Caught a squirrel twice. Caught a raccoon doing something that would definitely get it kicked off YouTube. But no humans.
Yet.
I started documenting everything. Every HOA letter. Every incident. Every weird thing that happened that felt just a little too suspicious. I wasn't going to accuse anyone without proof, but I wasn't going to stay unarmed either. Then one afternoon, something big happened. I was out front doing yard work, just trimming some hedges, minding my own business. That's when Melissa walked by with her dog. Tiny little fluff ball that looked like it had never touched grass before. She didn't say hi, didn't wave, but as she passed, she muttered loud enough for me to hear. You know, in some neighborhoods, people actually help each other. I turned, looked at her, didn't say a word, just stared. Because what do you even say to that? I help people who don't steal from me sounds petty. Enjoy paying for your own electricity sounds smug. There's no winning that conversation. So I let her walk. I let her think she won that round. But behind the scenes,
I was still documenting.
And it's a good thing I was, because a week later, everything escalated. It was trash pickup day again. I rolled my bins out just like always. And just like always, I brought them back in after collection. No delay. No funny business. Later that evening, I got a notice stuck to my door. Another violation. This time,
a fine.
$50 for repeat infraction, prolonged bin exposure. That's when I knew. Someone was filing fake complaints. And I had a very short list of suspects. So I did what anyone would do in my position. I submitted an appeal to the HOA with video evidence. The timestamped footage showed me pulling the bins back within 30 minutes of pickup. I emailed it directly to the HOA board with a note that said, "Please verify this before issuing further penalties." That's when things finally started to shift. 2 days later, I got a response from the HOA president himself. Short and to the point. "Thank you for the footage. The fine has been rescinded. We are currently reviewing a series of anonymous complaints and will be taking a closer look at their source."
Boom.
Not a victory yet, but the tide? Definitely turning. And just like that, for the first time in weeks, I got actual sleep. But not for long, because what came next made everything else feel like a warm-up. So just as I finally started breathing easier, thinking maybe things were cooling off, I woke up to a new problem. Literally woke up to it. It was 6:42 a.m. I remember the time exactly because my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front yard camera. Normally I'd ignore it that early, probably a bird or a squirrel. But something felt off. I checked the feed. And there she was. Melissa, in a bathrobe, with bed hair, standing in front of my driveway. Again, not charging this time, just standing there, holding something. Zoomed in and it hit me she was holding a clipboard. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, half asleep, trying to figure out if this was real. Then I saw her do it. She walked right up to the side of my house, pulled out her phone, snapped a picture of my exterior wall, then another of my driveway, then, unbelievably, another of my garage door. I sat up in bed. What was she doing? Creating a report? Trying to manufacture another violation? I threw on a hoodie and went outside. She saw me coming and actually smiled, like we were just two neighbors starting the day. I said, "Can I help you?" She said, "Just doing some documentation for the board. You know, in case anything needs to be brought up at the next meeting." I blinked, then said, "You don't have the authority to inspect my property." She didn't flinch, just said, "I'm the HOA secretary. I'm allowed to observe and report." I said, "You can observe from your own property. If I catch you over here again, I'll call the cops." She rolled her eyes and walked off like I was being dramatic. But I knew what she was doing. She wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to break me. See, people like her? They thrive on reaction. They want you to lose it. They want you to yell. Because the second you do, they run to the HOA crying harassment or aggression. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I was playing chess. So I went back inside, pulled the footage from the camera, clipped it, and sent it straight to the HOA board. Subject line: unwarranted trespassing by board member. Didn't hear back for 2 days. But when I did, it was beautiful. The HOA president called me. Not emailed, called. Said he'd received my video and that several other residents had also come forward with similar stories. Apparently, Melissa had been walking the neighborhood early in the mornings, clipboard in hand, snapping pictures of everyone's yard, driveway, and porch, pretending to be on official business. But she wasn't. She was just being Melissa. That week, they held an emergency board meeting. And while I wasn't invited to the private session, I did get the result. Melissa was suspended from her HOA secretary position. Pending further review, they said. But let's be honest, she was toast. The letter came 2 days later. Neatly folded. No apology, just a notification that, effective immediately, Melissa J. is no longer authorized to speak or act on behalf of the HOA board. It felt like a victory. A real one this time. But weirdly, I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my porch and looked across the street at her house. Curtains drawn. No Tesla in the driveway that day. Everything quiet. Too quiet. And maybe that should have been the end of the story. But it wasn't. Because a week later, just when I thought the war was over, something happened that changed everything. So about a week goes by. No clipboard. No photos. No weird early morning activity. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe she was laying low. Embarrassed. Or planning her next move. Either way, I kept my eyes open. Then one night, around 11:30 p.m., I got another motion alert from my driveway camera. Now, that late at night, I do check. And what I saw. Sent me straight into what the heck mode. It wasn't Melissa.
It was a guy.
Older. Maybe late 50s.
Baseball cap. Hoodie. Jeans.
He walked straight up to the side of my garage.
Paused.
Looked around. Then knelt down and started fiddling with something. At first, I couldn't tell what. Then I realized he was messing with the outlet. My charger. I jumped up, hit record on the camera feed, and dialed 911. As I'm explaining what's happening, I run to the front window. Try to get a better look. The guy was still there. Still hunched over. And now he had a screwdriver in his hand, trying to open the outlet box.
What the
actual
hell?
The dispatcher stays on the line, tells me officers are on the way. I'm narrating every move the guy makes. Suddenly, he stands up, looks right at my door camera, and bolts. Takes off down the street like a raccoon that just raided the wrong trash can. I waited until the cops showed up. Gave them the footage. Description. Everything. They said they'd look into it, but I already had my suspicion. This wasn't some random thief. This felt connected. And the next morning, that suspicion got confirmed. Because when I checked my side yard where the charger box is, there was a little scrap of paper tucked behind the panel, like it had fallen out of a pocket. I picked it up. It was a handwritten list. 4 names. 4 addresses. Mine was the first one. And right next to my name, it said, EV setup, garage side, check breaker. Yup. Somebody had been sent to tamper with my stuff. But by who? Let's be real. I didn't have enemies. I didn't have beef with anyone. Except Melissa. And remember, she had just lost her HOA position. She wasn't in power anymore. But maybe she wanted payback. Thing is, I couldn't prove she sent the guy. No name, no signature. Just a list and some footage. So I did the only thing I could do. I doubled down. Hired a local electrician again. We upgraded the charger panel. Reinforced the casing. Replaced the outlet cover with a locking version. Key access only. And we added one more thing. A decoy outlet. Fake wires. Dummy panel. Looks real. Works for exactly 3 seconds before triggering a silent alert and sending me a notification. I also bought a trail camera. Mounted it in a tree across the street. Hidden. Battery powered. Captures everything at night. Because if they came back, I wanted the whole show on camera. Sure enough, 2 nights later they did. Same guy. Same hoodie. Only this time, he didn't go for the real charger. He went straight for the fake outlet. Plugged something in and boom. Instant alert. I watched from my window in real time as he stood there, confused, tapping the box, looking around. Then the motion-activated spotlight kicked on. He froze like a deer. And then, he ran. Only this time he didn't get far. Because I had already called the cops. They caught him 2 blocks away. Turns out, he wasn't just some random creeper. He was a handyman. And guess whose name showed up in his phone under recent calls? Yup. Melissa. And now, we were in a whole new game. The cops took the handyman in for questioning. I wasn't there, but I got the call a few hours later. They said he admitted to tampering with the charger, but claimed he was just doing a favor for Melissa. Yeah, right. The story he gave? That Melissa hired him to inspect the electrical setup because she was worried about safety. Said she wanted to protect the neighborhood or something. Funny how protecting the neighborhood means sneaking around at night and trying to mess with my property. Anyway, the police weren't buying it. They told me Melissa was now officially a suspect in a case involving trespassing, attempted property damage, and theft of services. At this point, the HOA board had no choice but to launch their own internal investigation. Meanwhile, I made sure all my documentation was airtight. Copies of police reports, electricians' upgrade invoices, video footage, and emails from the HOA. I even hired a lawyer to draft a cease and desist letter addressed to Melissa. Nothing too aggressive, just enough to make it clear I was serious. She received it a few days later. No surprise, she didn't respond. But that silence spoke volumes. It was like she was admitting defeat without saying a word. Still, I knew better than to let my guard down. Because in these kinds of neighborhood battles, the war never really ends. And while I was finally feeling like I had the upper hand, Melissa was quietly plotting her next move. Days turned into weeks. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable, even if things seemed quiet on the surface. I kept my cameras rolling, my charger locked down tight, and my emails organized. Every new HOA letter got my full attention, just in case. But Melissa? She was gone from the HOA board, sidelined and silent. At least publicly. Behind the scenes, though, the rumor mill was spinning fast. Neighbors whispered about drama, about the Tesla lady's revenge, and about how one person's stubbornness had split the whole community. Some took my side. Others were still firmly in Melissa's camp. Then one afternoon I got a curious invitation. An official-looking email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Request for mediation meeting, neighborhood dispute." It was signed by the HOA president. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Was this a peace offering? A chance to finally settle everything? Or was it just another trap? I decided to reply. I told them I'd attend, but only with my lawyer. They agreed. So the day of the meeting came. I walked into the community center, lawyer by my side, prepared for anything. Melissa was there too, looking calm, but with that same sharp glint in her eyes. No cameras allowed inside, so I can't show you the footage, but I can tell you this. The air was thick with tension. Words were exchanged. Some apologies were made, though I'm not sure how sincere. Promises of moving forward floated around the room. But beneath it all, I could feel one thing very clearly. The battle lines had only shifted. They hadn't disappeared. And this story? It wasn't over yet. After that meeting, things seemed to settle a bit. No more midnight visits, no more surprise letters. The neighborhood felt almost normal again. But I wasn't fooled. I knew this peace was fragile. Like a thin layer of ice over a deep lake, one wrong move, and it could shatter. I kept checking my cameras daily. Watching. Waiting. Because you never know when someone like Melissa might strike again. And sure enough, a few nights later, the motion sensor caught something. Not a person this time, but a car parked outside my house. Lights off. Engine running quietly. Just sitting there. I didn't recognize the vehicle. No headlights. No movement. I snapped a picture and sent it to the local police non-emergency line. Told them to keep an eye out if possible. I felt watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was reality. Someone was still playing games. That's when I realized this wasn't just about electricity, chargers, or even the HOA anymore. This was about respect, boundaries, and standing up to people who think they can take what isn't theirs. And if Melissa thought sending a guy in the night would scare me off or make me give up my charger, she was dead wrong. Because this wasn't just about a Tesla or stolen bolts. It was about me. And I wasn't going anywhere. Weeks passed after that late-night car incident. I kept my guard up every single day, but life, as it always does, tried to get back to normal. I watered the plants, mowed the lawn, and even tried to catch up on some reading. But the shadow of everything with Melissa was never far away. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification from the security cameras, my heart skipped a beat. Was it another prowler? Another note slipped under the door? Or just a raccoon on a midnight snack run? I started documenting everything in a notebook, dates, times, descriptions of events. What started as a few scribbles soon turned into a full logbook of the drama unfolding around my house. Odd noises at night, weird smells near the driveway, strangers passing by who'd pause and stare just a little too long. It was like living in a thriller. The neighbors had their own opinions, of course. Some whispered behind their curtains, afraid to get involved. Others gave me nods of solidarity or thumbs up when we crossed paths. But the most surprising thing? A few of the neighbors who had always been neutral suddenly started to talk openly about Melissa's antics. It seemed my little battle had sparked something bigger, a breaking point for a lot of folks who had silently suffered their own versions of petty HOA disputes. One afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peered through the peephole cautiously. It was Mrs. Hernandez from 2 doors down, the sweet old lady who always baked cookies and somehow knew everyone's business before they even knew it themselves. She smiled nervously and held out a manila envelope. "I thought you might want to see this," she said softly. Inside were pages, handwritten notes, photos, even some text messages she'd copied and pasted from a neighborhood chat group. It was a treasure trove of evidence, showing Melissa's long history of causing trouble, from filing bogus HOA complaints against neighbors to unauthorized visits at odd hours. Mrs. Hernandez confessed she hadn't wanted to get involved before. "I was scared," she admitted. "But now, well, I think you're standing up for all of us." I thanked her and promised to keep everything safe. This was no longer just about my Tesla charger or a stolen plug. This was about exposing a pattern of entitlement and manipulation, the kind of behavior that tears communities apart. That night, I reviewed everything carefully. Photos of Melissa lurking around neighbors' yards. Screenshots of messages where she'd encourage others to report violations that didn't exist. Even a blurry photo of her handing the handyman that infamous list of addresses and instructions. My lawyer advised me to keep this under wraps for now. We didn't want to provoke her more than necessary. But the more I saw, the more I realized this was a chance to change the whole dynamic in our neighborhood. Meanwhile, I kept reinforcing my home's defenses. The electrician came by again to install additional security lighting that could be controlled remotely. We set up a high-decibel alarm on the charger box that would blare if anyone tried to tamper with it. And I invested in a smart lock for my front gate, something that Melissa couldn't bypass. Despite all this, I still felt a creeping unease. There was a paranoia that settled in deep, like a constant hum at the back of my mind. Every creak in the floor, every car passing slowly, felt like a warning sign. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with an unusual alert from the Neighborhood Watch app. A message popped up from a neighbor I barely knew, someone who lived 3 streets over. The message was simple. "Have you seen these? Found them in my mailbox this morning." Attached were photos of sticky notes plastered around the neighborhood, right in the public spaces, at bus stops, the community park, even the dog park. They read things like, "Power thief lives here. Tesla bandit, and electrified greed. Watch your watts." Each note was signed with the initials Karen. My stomach sank. The harassment wasn't just at my house anymore. It was turning into a full-blown public shaming campaign. Someone was going out of their way to humiliate me and paint me as the villain in this story. I considered reporting it to the police, but with no proof of who was posting them, I knew it would be hard to take action. Instead, I took photos, logged the incidents, and added them to my growing dossier. The next day, I talked to a few neighbors in passing, casually bringing up the notes.
Some seemed shocked.
Others shrugged like this kind of drama was just part of living here. But a few said they were tired of the constant tension and hoped it would all just end soon. And yet I knew better. Because Melissa wasn't done. The escalation was subtle at first. A faint smell of burnt rubber near the driveway one morning. The garden hose mysteriously disconnected and left leaking overnight. A window left open that I was sure I'd closed. Nothing concrete enough to call the cops about, but enough to send a message. It was psychological warfare. And then came the real kicker. One afternoon, as I was returning home from work, I noticed something odd about my electricity bill. It was sky-high, way above normal, almost double what I expected. My heart sank. Had someone been stealing my power again? But this time on a bigger scale? I called the utility company immediately. They agreed to send a technician out to check for any irregularities or unauthorized connections. The technician arrived the next day. After a thorough inspection, he found something that chilled me. A hidden, unauthorized power line had been tapped from my meter box, leading out beneath the fence line, heading straight toward Melissa's property. Someone had been siphoning electricity from my meter. And that someone wasn't just a random thief. It was her. The HOA drama had crossed into outright theft. I called my lawyer and the police right away. The case was no longer about petty complaints or stolen volts to charge a Tesla. It was criminal. At the police station, I gave my statement, handed over all the evidence I'd collected, from videos to photos to neighbor testimonies. They took it seriously. A formal investigation was launched. But I also knew this wasn't just about legal battles. This was personal. emotional. A fight for my home, my peace of mind, and my dignity. So I doubled down. I started speaking openly to neighbors, encouraging others who had similar experiences with Melissa to come forward. Slowly, a network of people began to form. People who were tired of feeling powerless against someone who used entitlement and manipulation as weapons. Meanwhile, Melissa kept up the facade. Outwardly polite, outwardly calm. But behind the scenes, the tension was undeniable. One day, I received a message through the HOA mailing list. It was from her. A passive-aggressive note disguised as a community update. It thanked neighbors for cooperating with HOA guidelines and reminded everyone to respect each other's property and privacy. A clear jab at me. But I didn't reply. Instead, I prepared. Prepared for the inevitable showdown. Because people like Melissa don't just quit. They escalate. They retaliate. And I knew that whatever came next, I had to be ready. After Melissa's passive-aggressive HOA message, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. You could feel the tension in the air, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Even the neighbors who hadn't spoken much before started casting wary glances my way. Some were curious, some cautious, and a few outright suspicious. It was as if Melissa's subtle campaign had seeded doubt. I wasn't about to let that happen. I ramped up my efforts, documenting every encounter, every strange event. I organized all my evidence into neat folders, digital and physical, ready for anything that might come next. The lawyer was on standby, keeping me updated on legal options and strategy. But Melissa wasn't just content with indirect digs anymore. One morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address. No signature. Just a single typed sentence. You can't hide behind your cameras forever. That line hit me hard. Not because I was scared, but because I realized this was personal. Deeply personal. The conflict wasn't just about stolen electricity anymore. It was about control, power, and pride. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. My mailbox was vandalized. Tires on my car slashed. Neighbors reported seeing strange people hanging around late at night, watching my house. At one point, a brick was thrown through my garage window. Thankfully, no one was home. I reported everything to the police, but without direct proof, there wasn't much they could do immediately. The officers encouraged me to keep gathering evidence and assured me they were increasing patrols. That's when I decided to install even more security, infrared cameras, floodlights, and a smart alarm system connected to my phone. Every time a sensor triggered, I got an instant alert. It was exhausting but necessary. Meanwhile, I kept my cool. I refused to react publicly or engage in social media drama. I wanted to win this quietly, on my own terms. One afternoon, I got a call from the HOA president. He sounded sincere, apologetic even. Said the board was concerned and wanted to hold a special meeting to address the situation and find a peaceful resolution. I agreed immediately. At the meeting, neighbors gathered in the community hall, the mood tense but hopeful. The president opened with a statement about respecting property rights and maintaining neighborhood harmony. Then it was my turn. I calmly presented my evidence. Videos, photos, the electrician's report, police statements, even Mrs. Hernandez's testimonials. I laid it all out, piece by piece, showing how Melissa's actions had crossed every line. Some neighbors nodded in understanding. Others looked uncomfortable, but no one argued. Finally, the board voted to formally ban Melissa from all HOA activities. They also agreed to send a warning letter threatening legal action if she continued harassment. For a moment, I felt relief wash over me. Maybe this chapter was finally closing. But as I drove home that night, I realized one thing. This wasn't just about Melissa or the Tesla Charger anymore. It was about standing up to anyone who thinks they can take what's not theirs. About fighting for respect and fairness. And no matter what happens next, I know I'm ready. After the HOA banned Melissa, I thought things would calm down. But in situations like this, peace is often just the calm before the storm. A few days after the board's decision, I noticed a new pattern. Small but calculated acts designed to wear me down, to get under my skin. It started with the garden. One morning, I stepped outside and saw the flower beds trampled. Not by animals but by heavy boots. The soil was packed down, petals crushed. My carefully tended garden wrecked. I checked the security footage. The night before, a shadowy figure moved through the yard. It was too dark to make out a face, but the build and gait reminded me of the handyman caught months earlier. I shared the clip with the police, but they said it wasn't enough for an arrest. Just another incident on the record. Then came the car. My sedan, parked on the street, was keyed from front to back. Deep, angry scratches. It was a clear message. You're not welcome here. Neighbors saw it and expressed sympathy, but I noticed some avoided eye contact after. Maybe some thought I was stirring the pot, or that this drama was a distraction from other community issues. The nights were the worst. I started hearing noises outside, soft footsteps, low voices speaking in hushed tones. One night, I woke up to the sound of my driveway gate creaking. I grabbed my phone and quietly checked the live feed. Two figures were standing there, one holding a flashlight, the other fiddling with my gate's lock. They clearly knew what they were doing. I called the police immediately, but by the time officers arrived, the intruders had vanished. The police suggested installing more physical barriers, motion sensors, reinforced locks, and told me to be vigilant. I took their advice seriously. Over the next week, I upgraded the entire perimeter with new smart locks, motion-detecting floodlights, and even planted thorny bushes near the gate to deter trespassers. But it wasn't just physical attacks. Someone started spreading rumors, too. I heard through the grapevine that Melissa was telling neighbors I was paranoid, exaggerating the situation, making a mountain out of a molehill. She claimed I was the real troublemaker, trying to stir conflict for attention. That hit hard. Because in a small community, reputation is everything. And when whispers start, they spread fast. To fight back, I began attending more neighborhood meetings, speaking openly but calmly. I shared my experiences, my evidence, and urged everyone to focus on unity and respect rather than division. Slowly, some minds began to change. A few neighbors came forward with their own stories about Melissa's manipulations, quiet complaints, unfair demands, petty disputes. It felt like a turning point, but the cost was real. My stress level soared. Sleep became a luxury. Every noise made me jump. I found myself double-checking locks 3 times before bed, watching camera feeds late into the night. I wondered if Melissa even realized how far she'd pushed me. One afternoon, my lawyer called with unexpected news. The police investigation into the power theft and harassment was gaining traction. The handyman had confessed more details about Melissa's involvement. There were texts and voice messages tying her directly to several acts of vandalism. This was big, but it also meant the fight was far from over. Melissa wasn't going down without a fight. She hired a lawyer, and suddenly the legal battle became a war. She filed restraining orders against me, claiming harassment and defamation. I responded with my own countersuits: trespassing, theft, property damage. The courtroom became the new battleground. And while the HOA drama played out in meetings and whispers, the real action was behind closed doors with lawyers and judges. Despite the chaos, I refused to back down. Every hearing, every deposition, was a reminder that this fight was about more than just a stolen charge or an angry neighbor. It was about standing up to entitlement, about protecting what's yours, about demanding respect. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, and the nights were still long and restless, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. The community was watching. And soon, they'd have to choose sides. The courtroom battles stretched on for months. Every hearing felt like a battle of wills, Melissa's lawyer pushing hard to discredit me, painting me as paranoid and aggressive, while my lawyer methodically laid out the evidence piece by piece. The stolen electricity, the vandalism, the harassment, it was all there, documented and undeniable. But legal fights are never simple. The more we uncovered, the more complicated it seemed. Melissa's side claimed she was a victim of false accusations. She said the whole thing was a neighborhood feud blown out of proportion. Her lawyer insisted the handyman had acted alone, without her knowledge. It was a classic, he said. She said standoff that tested my patience daily. Meanwhile, the HOA meetings became a tense battlefield. Some members tried to stay neutral, but others openly took sides. The community was split, and every meeting was filled with whispered conversations and cold shoulders. The once friendly block parties and casual chats over the fence had all but disappeared. But I refused to let this break me. I spent countless evenings researching HOA laws, tenants' rights, and property laws. I read stories from others who had dealt with toxic neighbors and entitlement run amok. I learned how to present my case clearly and firmly, not just in court, but in conversations with neighbors and HOA members. I started sharing snippets of my story without naming names on neighborhood forums and online community groups. The response was surprising. People started sharing their own experiences with entitled neighbors, with stolen utilities, with petty HOA wars that had destroyed friendships and divided communities. It was like a dam had broken. More and more people reached out privately, thanking me for speaking up. Some wanted advice. Others wanted to join forces. Slowly but surely, a community movement was forming, one focused on fairness, respect, and standing up to toxic behavior. But that didn't mean Melissa was giving up. She escalated her tactics. One night, I came home to find my front porch vandalized. Spray paint covered the walls with hateful messages and crude drawings. Someone had also left a dead animal on my doorstep, a disgusting and clear attempt to intimidate me. I was shaken, but not broken. I took photos, called the police, and reported everything. The HOA sent a cleaning crew the next day, and neighbors expressed shock and sympathy. Still, the fear lingered. Whoever was behind this was sending a message: stop or suffer worse. But I refused to be silenced. I installed even more security measures: cameras with night vision, a doorbell camera, motion-activated sprinklers that would soak anyone who got too close. Every night, I checked the feeds before bed. Every alert made my heart race. And then one night, something happened that changed everything. At 2:34 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from the front gate camera. Someone was there. Not one, but 3 people, moving slowly and deliberately. I zoomed in on the live feed: 2 men and a woman, dressed all in black, faces covered. They were trying to cut through the fence. I called 911 immediately, whispering into the phone while I kept watching. The police said they were dispatching officers right away. The intruders worked fast, but the motion-activated sprinklers soaked them before they could fully breach the yard. Flustered, they scattered into the darkness as sirens approached. The police arrived minutes later and searched the neighborhood, but found no sign of the trespassers. This wasn't random vandalism anymore. It was a planned break-in. I shared the footage with the police and the HOA. The investigation intensified. Still, no arrests. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also more determined than ever. I wasn't going to let fear control me. That incident became a turning point. Neighbors who had been silent before started coming forward with their own concerns. Reports of break-ins, thefts, and suspicious activity increased. It became clear Melissa's influence wasn't limited to me. There was a web of intimidation and entitlement affecting the whole community. In response, the HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss neighborhood safety. They approved funding for increased security patrols, neighborhood watch programs, and upgraded lighting in public spaces. For the first time, the neighborhood felt like it was coming together, not because of one person's drama, but because everyone realized the stakes were higher. At home, I installed a panic button linked directly to the police. I also bought a safe to protect important documents and valuables. Every day, I balanced living normally with staying alert. But then came the next shock. My electric company called. They'd been reviewing my account and discovered unusual spikes in consumption that went beyond what we already knew about the illegal tap. They suspected someone had rigged a device inside my meter box, something that siphoned power without leaving obvious traces. They sent a technician to replace my meter with a state-of-the-art smart meter that could detect tampering in real time. I watched the tech work carefully, thankful for the upgrade, but anxious about what else might show up. 2 weeks later, the new meter sent an alert. Someone was trying to interfere again. I called the police immediately. This time, the response was quicker. The officers came by and found clear signs of tampering on the meter box. They took fingerprints and dusted for evidence. That same day, the HOA board sent a formal letter to Melissa, warning her that any further illegal actions would result in immediate legal consequences. Melissa responded with a lawyer's letter accusing me of harassment and defamation. It was a constant back and forth, legal filings, restraining orders, counterclaims. Meanwhile, the stress was taking a toll. Friends noticed I was more withdrawn, more anxious. I struggled to sleep, to focus at work, to enjoy life. But I knew I couldn't give up. I reminded myself daily why I started this fight. Not just for me, but for everyone in the neighborhood who had been pushed around or ignored. One afternoon, I got a call from the police detective leading the case. They'd managed to track down a couple of the individuals involved in the attempted break-in and the vandalism. They had connections to Melissa, friends, contractors she'd hired, people who admitted they acted on her behalf. It was the break we needed. The detective said charges were being filed. But they warned me it wouldn't be quick or easy. Melissa was digging in. The legal battle was far from over. The neighborhood was still divided, and the personal toll was heavier than ever. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos, I found a surprising source of strength. Neighbors who had once avoided me started stopping to chat, offering help, sharing stories, even bringing over cookies. It was a reminder that beneath the conflict, there was still community, still humanity,
Still hope.
and that made every sleepless night and every angry text worth it. Because standing up to an entitled Karen stealing my electricity and trying to ruin my life wasn't just about me anymore. It was about fighting for what's right, for respect,
For peace.
and for a neighborhood worth calling home. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The legal process dragged on, and every day brought new challenges. Melissa's lawyers were relentless, filing motions and counterclaims designed to frustrate and intimidate me. But I was determined to keep fighting. I started waking up before dawn, reviewing evidence, writing emails, and coordinating with my lawyer. I realized this wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. It had become a full-blown battle for justice. Despite the chaos, small victories began to emerge. The police arrested 2 of the individuals involved in the break-ins and vandalism, and their testimonies confirmed Melissa's involvement in orchestrating these acts. It was a major breakthrough, and I felt a surge of hope. The HOA also took stronger action. After hearing the court developments, they formally expelled Melissa from the community. Her access to shared amenities was revoked, and she was barred from all HOA meetings and events. The board even installed new policies to prevent such abuses of power in the future, which was a relief for many neighbors who had long been intimidated. As the court dates approached, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. The courtroom was intimidating, a place where every word mattered, every gesture was scrutinized. But I was ready to face it head-on. On the first day, Melissa's lawyer tried to discredit me by painting me as a vindictive neighbor who exaggerated everything. They questioned my character, my motives, even my sanity. It was frustrating, but I stayed calm. I let the facts speak for themselves. I presented the evidence in a clear, organized way: photos of the vandalism, security footage of trespassers, expert testimony from the electrician who discovered the illegal power tap. The judge seemed engaged, asking pointed questions and requesting additional documents. For the first time, I felt like the truth was truly being heard. Over the next few sessions, witnesses from the neighborhood came forward. Mrs. Hernandez spoke about Melissa's repeated demands and bullying tactics. The handyman admitted to following Melissa's orders to tamper with my electricity. Even some former allies of Melissa testified, showing how her behavior affected the entire community. It was powerful. It was cathartic. And it made me realize how many others had been hurt by entitlement and selfishness disguised as authority. Outside the courtroom, life continued to throw challenges. Melissa escalated her harassment, sending anonymous letters accusing me of spying on her, trying to ruin her reputation. She spread rumors that I was responsible for the break-ins, trying to turn the community against me again. But this time I was ready. I documented everything, shared it with the police, and kept my focus on the bigger picture. At home, my security system caught suspicious activity multiple times. One night, someone tried to disable my cameras with a laser pointer. Another time, someone threw a rock through my back window. I was forced to replace the glass twice in 1 month. Despite the exhaustion, I felt an unexpected surge of support. Neighbors who once stayed silent now offered to help with repairs or just check in on me. Some even volunteered to join the neighborhood watch. The community was rallying together, turning fear into solidarity. One afternoon, during a neighborhood meeting, the atmosphere felt different. People were talking openly about entitlement, about respect, about boundaries. The conversations were honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary. We were rebuilding trust. Even Melissa's closest supporters began to distance themselves. Her reputation was crumbling. Then came the final court day. The judge reviewed all the evidence, heard closing statements, and announced the verdict. Melissa was found guilty of theft, harassment, and vandalism. The court ordered her to pay restitution for the stolen electricity and damages to my property. She was also fined and placed under a restraining order. It felt surreal. Years of stress, fear, and conflict boiled down to this moment. But there was no gloating, no celebration, just a deep sense of relief. I knew this was the beginning of healing for me, for my family, and hopefully for the neighborhood. Life slowly returned to normal. The community began hosting events again, block parties, yard sales, and neighborhood cleanups. Smiles returned. Conversations resumed. And while scars remained, both physical and emotional, the fight had changed us all. It taught me about resilience, about standing up for what's right, and about the power of community. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about stolen electricity or a Tesla charger. It's about respect,
Trust.
and the courage to say, enough is enough. Even after the court ruling, the ripples of the conflict didn't immediately fade away. In fact, the aftermath brought a new set of challenges, ones I hadn't anticipated. You might think that when someone is held accountable, things just go back to normal, but in reality, it was much more complicated. For weeks, I noticed the atmosphere in the neighborhood was still heavy with tension. Some neighbors openly supported me, while others remained hesitant, unwilling to get involved in what they saw as a messy, ongoing feud. I realized the damage to community trust ran deep, and healing would take time. Melissa, despite the court's decision, didn't back down quietly either. She continued to spread rumors and accusations, trying to salvage her reputation. She posted anonymous messages on local social media pages, painting herself as a victim of a smear campaign. It was exhausting to see her twist the story, but I stayed focused on facts and truth. At the same time, I started receiving unexpected messages from other people outside my neighborhood. Some were strangers who had seen parts of my story online. Others were people who had dealt with similar issues. They shared their own experiences of dealing with difficult neighbors, unfair HOA politics, or property disputes. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to express support. It was overwhelming but also inspiring. It showed me that these problems aren't isolated. They happen everywhere, to regular people trying to live peaceful lives. The HOA board, after the dust settled, took steps to improve transparency and communication. They held open forums where residents could voice concerns directly. They established clearer guidelines on utility use and property boundaries. They also started offering conflict resolution workshops, hoping to prevent future disputes. These changes felt positive, but I knew real healing would require time and patience. One day, while cleaning up my yard, I was approached by an elderly neighbor, Mr. Thompson. He was someone I had barely spoken to before, mostly because he kept to himself. But that afternoon, he stopped to say something. "You've handled this whole mess with a lot of grace," he said quietly. "It hasn't been easy for any of us, but your courage has made a difference." His words touched me deeply. It reminded me that even small acts of kindness can help rebuild trust. Around that same time, I decided to host a small neighborhood barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers, some music, and a chance for people to reconnect. I wasn't sure how many would show up, or if people would even come after all the drama. But I hoped it would be a step toward healing. To my surprise, quite a few neighbors came. Some brought dishes to share. Kids ran around playing. Conversations started naturally, with laughter and stories. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of community. That night, as I cleaned up the last plates and said goodbye to guests, I realized how important moments like these are. They remind us that even after conflict and hardship, people can come together again. But I also knew there was a lesson beneath all of this. Sometimes, standing up for what's right means facing battles you never expected. It means dealing with people who think they're entitled to more than their fair share. It means protecting your home, your peace, and your dignity. And yes, it sometimes means pushing through fear and frustration to fight for justice. In the end, it's about more than electricity stolen or a Tesla charged without permission. It's about respect for boundaries, for others' property, and for the simple right to live without harassment. As the months passed, I continued to stay vigilant. I maintained my security systems, kept detailed records, and stayed engaged with the HOA. I made new friends, strengthened old relationships, and found peace in knowing I had done everything I could to stand up for myself and my community. Looking back, the whole experience was exhausting and painful, but it also made me stronger. And it taught me a powerful truth. When entitlement tries to steal what isn't theirs, standing firm is the only way forward. Life after the courtroom ruling was far from simple. Even though justice had been served, the aftermath of everything that had happened with Melissa lingered like a shadow over the neighborhood. It was strange, the legal battle was over, but the emotional battle had only just begun. At first, I thought the worst was behind me. The judge's decision seemed like the closing chapter. Melissa's access to community amenities was cut off. She was fined, and the restraining order gave me a sense of protection. But the reality was that not everyone was ready to move on so quickly. Some neighbors quietly took sides, while others stayed on the fence, unsure how to react. Gossip still swirled. Melissa's supporters whispered in corners, casting doubt on the judgment, questioning the evidence, and trying to salvage her reputation. It became clear that winning in court wasn't enough. There was a deeper healing needed, not just for me, but for the community as a whole. One afternoon, I was invited to a community meeting focused on rebuilding trust and strengthening relationships within the neighborhood. It was a space to air frustrations, share experiences, and brainstorm solutions for a healthier environment. The room was packed. Faces I hadn't seen in months showed up. Some neighbors spoke openly about how Melissa's actions had impacted them personally. Others admitted they had been too afraid or indifferent to intervene before. It was raw and honest. And it was a turning point. I shared my story, emphasizing how entitlement and selfishness can poison not just property lines, but relationships too. I talked about how standing up for what's right isn't about being a troublemaker, it's about protecting what matters. There were nods of agreement and even a few tears. After the meeting, a group formed, neighbors committed to creating a more supportive and respectful environment. We planned regular gatherings, safety patrols, and even started a community newsletter to keep everyone informed and connected. It was heartening to see people come together after so much division. But the road to recovery wasn't without setbacks. Melissa, despite the court's ruling, tried to maintain her influence from afar. She sent anonymous complaints to the HOA about trivial matters, hoping to provoke conflict. She posted veiled threats on social media. And on occasion, she showed up near community events, creating uncomfortable scenes before being escorted away. It was frustrating to deal with, but I kept reminding myself that her actions no longer define the neighborhood. Meanwhile, my personal life began to settle again. The constant stress had taken a toll on my health and relationships. I made a point to prioritize self-care, exercising regularly, spending time with family, and seeking therapy to process the trauma. I learned that healing wasn't just about external changes, it was about restoring inner peace. Through therapy, I discovered tools to manage anxiety and fear. I practiced mindfulness to stay grounded during moments of stress. And I built a support system of friends and neighbors who understood and cared. At the same time, I stayed active in the neighborhood's efforts. I volunteered to help organize events, took part in safety meetings, and even helped draft new guidelines for HOA conduct. The community slowly transformed. Where once there was fear and suspicion, there was now cautious optimism. New friendships formed, block parties returned. Yard sales and holiday gatherings became traditions again. Children played freely outside, neighbors stopped to chat, and smiles came easier. Yet I never forgot the lessons from the ordeal. I knew entitlement could creep back if left unchecked. That's why I remained vigilant. I regularly checked my property, maintained security systems, and kept open lines of communication with local authorities. I also became an advocate for fair and transparent HOA governance, pushing for policies that protect residents from abuses of power. My story even caught the attention of a local journalist who wrote an article about neighborhood conflicts and the importance of community resilience. The piece resonated with many and sparked conversations far beyond our block. Looking back, I realized this experience reshaped my understanding of what it means to be a neighbor. It's not just about proximity or shared spaces. It's about respect, responsibility, and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about listening, understanding, and working together. And sometimes, it's about having the courage to face entitlement head-on, no matter the cost. Today, I feel a renewed sense of purpose. I'm no longer just someone who had electricity stolen to charge a Tesla. I'm part of a community that survived hardship, faced conflict, and chose to grow stronger. Because in the end, the true power lies not in volts or charges, but in unity, respect, and the will to protect what matters most. Even though the legal battle with Melissa was behind me, the impact of that struggle stayed with me every day. It wasn't just the stolen electricity or the Tesla charging drama anymore. It was about how one person's sense of entitlement could shake an entire community. That reality stayed heavy in the air long after the courtroom doors closed. I found myself reflecting a lot on the whole experience. How something as simple as a shared electric meter could spark months of conflict and fear. How the actions of one person, fueled by arrogance and disregard, could disrupt not just my life, but the lives of neighbors, friends, and even strangers who heard the story. In the weeks and months following the court ruling, I started to notice subtle changes around the neighborhood. Slowly, the cold stares and awkward silences began to fade. More neighbors started talking openly again. Smiles became more common. It felt like we were reclaiming the sense of community that had been lost. But the journey to that point was anything but smooth. I still had to deal with the fallout, both practical and emotional. There were days when I'd catch myself double-checking the security cameras, even when there was no real reason to be suspicious. Old habits die hard. The fear and anxiety from the months of harassment didn't just vanish overnight. At times, I struggled to sleep through the night. The sound of a car door closing or a dog barking outside would send my heart racing. I found myself constantly on edge, always wondering if Melissa or her supporters would try something else. It was exhausting, but I knew I couldn't let fear rule my life. So I took steps to rebuild my sense of safety and peace. I upgraded my home security system with new cameras, alarms, and motion detectors. I made sure every window and door was secure. I connected with local police and community watch groups to stay informed and involved. On top of that, I leaned heavily on my friends and family for support. Their encouragement kept me grounded during the darkest moments. I also sought professional help to process the trauma and anxiety that lingered. Therapy became a vital part of my healing journey. It gave me tools to manage stress, face my fears, and rebuild my confidence. I began to understand that healing wasn't just about what happened outside my door. It was about what happened inside my mind and heart. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was healing too. HOA meetings became less tense. New policies were put in place to prevent the kind of abuse and entitlement that had caused so much trouble. These changes were small but meaningful, a promise that the community would not tolerate such behavior again. I volunteered to help lead some of these initiatives, wanting to ensure the mistakes of the past weren't repeated. One of the most powerful moments came during a neighborhood block party we organized several months after everything had settled down. It was the first time in a long while that many neighbors felt safe enough to gather, laugh, and enjoy each other's company. Kids ran through sprinklers. Grills smoked. Music played softly in the background. People shared stories, food, and smiles. I stood by the grill, watching the scene unfold. It struck me how fragile community is and how easy it is to lose, but also how strong it can be when people choose connection over conflict. That night, a few neighbors came up to me, thanking me for standing up and not giving in to the harassment. Some shared their own stories of difficult neighbors and entitlement, stories I hadn't heard before. It made me realize that what I went through wasn't isolated. This kind of conflict happens all the time in neighborhoods everywhere. That sparked an idea. If my experience could help others, maybe it was worth sharing more widely. I started writing about the whole ordeal, blog posts, social media updates, even guest articles for local websites about dealing with entitled neighbors and protecting your rights. The response was incredible. People from all over the country reached out, sharing their own stories and asking for advice. Some even thanked me for giving a voice to a problem they'd struggled with in silence. It was humbling. And it reminded me that while one person's entitlement can cause havoc, collective action and awareness can bring about change. As time went on, I also began to focus on prevention, educating neighbors on how to spot early signs of entitlement and abuse, how to communicate boundaries clearly, and how to get help when needed. We formed a neighborhood committee dedicated to conflict resolution and community building. The goal was simple: keep small problems from turning into big ones. We invited speakers from local law enforcement and legal experts to talk about property rights, HOA regulations, and tenant protections. We held workshops on respectful communication and boundary setting. These efforts helped transform the culture of the neighborhood. Where suspicion and fear once ruled, now respect and cooperation began to take root. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Some old grudges lingered. Some neighbors still kept their distance. But overall, the community was moving forward. Personally, I felt stronger, more confident, less afraid. I had learned to stand my ground without losing my peace, to fight when necessary, but to seek connection when possible. I even started exploring ways to help beyond my neighborhood, connecting with organizations focused on tenant rights and community advocacy. This entire experience became more than just a personal story. It became a mission to help others navigate the tricky waters of neighbor disputes, entitlement, and community conflict. I'm still living in the same neighborhood, and yes, I'm still mindful about my electricity use. But now, there's a sense of calm and control. The battle with Melissa taught me a lot. About power, about boundaries, and about resilience. Most importantly, it taught me that standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's always worth it. Because at the end of the day, a neighborhood isn't just a place on a map. It's the people who live there and how they treat each other. And that's something worth fighting for. Even as time passed and the immediate conflict with Melissa faded into the background, the impact of what had happened left lasting impressions on me and on the neighborhood. Sometimes, the battles that feel the most draining are the ones that teach us the most about people, community, and ourselves. One of the biggest lessons I learned was about the power of entitlement. It's something subtle but dangerous. When someone believes they're above rules and respect, it doesn't just affect them. It ripples outward and affects everyone around them. In Melissa's case, it was her belief that she could take electricity without permission to charge her Tesla that kicked everything off. But behind that one act was a pattern of behavior, a disregard for others, a sense of privilege that let her steamroll over neighbors and the HOA alike. That mindset is something many people encounter in neighborhoods, workplaces, families, or anywhere people interact. And it can be incredibly corrosive. What made this situation even more challenging was how the entitlement wasn't just about one small action. It was a way of life for Melissa, a habit of pushing boundaries, bullying others, and refusing to listen. When she tapped into my electricity, that was just the spark. The fire came from everything else: harassment, lies, vandalism. I realized that fighting entitlement means more than addressing the surface issue. It means challenging a whole attitude and culture. That's why after the court case ended, I didn't just want to walk away quietly. I wanted to help prevent this kind of thing from happening again. To me, to my neighbors, or anyone else. One of the first things I did was to organize a neighborhood watch program. We had tried something similar before, but this time it was different.
People were invested.
They understood the stakes. We held regular meetings where neighbors could share concerns, update each other on suspicious activity, and plan patrols. It wasn't about creating a hostile environment, but about watching out for one another and reclaiming our sense of safety. The program quickly gained momentum. Neighbors who had been distant or skeptical became active participants. We set up communication channels, group chats, phone trees, to ensure everyone was informed in real time. This gave many of us peace of mind, especially those who had felt vulnerable before. The HOA also stepped up. They hired a professional management company to oversee community operations, which helped reduce internal conflicts and improve transparency. The new management instituted clear rules about utility usage, property boundaries, and community conduct. They also created a fair complaint and mediation process to address disputes early, before they could escalate. It was a relief to see the HOA taking responsibility and working for the residents. On a personal level, I took steps to educate myself and others about legal rights and community standards. I read up on tenant and homeowner laws, learned about electrical safety and property codes, and connected with local advocacy groups. This knowledge empowered me to protect my home and stand up confidently when issues arose. I also volunteered to lead workshops for neighbors, teaching them how to recognize signs of entitlement and abuse and how to handle conflicts constructively. These sessions were well received. People were eager to learn and share their own stories. The sense of solidarity grew stronger. One unexpected outcome was how these experiences brought some neighbors together who had never interacted before. Shared challenges often create bonds, and our neighborhood was no exception. We formed new friendships, started community projects like garden cleanups and holiday celebrations, and supported each other through tough times. Seeing this transformation reminded me how resilience can emerge from hardship. Of course, the road wasn't always smooth. Melissa's attempts to undermine the peace continued sporadically. She sent anonymous letters, tried to sow discord on social media, and occasionally lurked around community events. Each time, the neighborhood was ready to respond, calmly, collectively, and legally. Her influence faded as people refused to be drawn into her drama. One day, I received a surprising message from her, an apology. It was brief and hesitant, but it acknowledged the harm she'd caused. I wasn't sure what to do with it at first. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance. But another part saw it as a sign of change, or at least the possibility of it. I replied cautiously, thanking her for the message and expressing hope that we could all move forward peacefully. We never became friends or close, but the tension eased significantly after that. That moment showed me the power of forgiveness, not just for others, but for myself. Letting go of bitterness freed up energy to focus on positive growth. Looking back, the entire ordeal reshaped how I view conflict and community. I learned that standing up to entitlement takes courage, persistence, and sometimes legal action. But it also requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to rebuild bridges. Most importantly, I discovered that neighborhoods are more than houses and streets. They're living networks of people, imperfect, complicated, but capable of great kindness and strength. Today, I continue to live in that same neighborhood. The scars from the conflict remain, but they're part of a story of survival and transformation. I'm proud of how far we've come, and I'm hopeful for the future. Because when entitlement tries to take more than it deserves, the best response isn't just confrontation. It's community. It's respect. It's the collective will to protect what matters. And that's a power no one can steal. Even after everything settled down, there was a lingering feeling that the story wasn't truly over. Not because Melissa was still causing trouble, she had mostly disappeared from the scene, but because what happened revealed something bigger. It showed how entitlement and selfishness can quietly poison even the best communities, and how easy it is for respect to be taken for granted. I started to notice subtle signs in other parts of the neighborhood and beyond. Small boundary crossings, careless disregard for shared resources, a growing sense that some people believed rules didn't apply to them. The conflict with Melissa was an extreme example, but it was just the tip of an iceberg. That realization pushed me to keep working, to do more than just defend my own property. I wanted to help create a community culture that wouldn't tolerate entitlement in any form, because I'd seen firsthand how destructive it could be. One of the first things I did was to launch a neighborhood initiative called Respect Starts Here. The goal was simple: remind everyone that a strong community depends on respect, fairness, and accountability. We started with basic but powerful steps: posting friendly reminders about respecting property lines, not taking what's not yours, and communicating openly with neighbors. I created flyers, designed social media posts, and even arranged for posters in common areas. The message was positive, but firm.
People appreciated it.
Many told me they felt heard and valued for the first time in a long while. The initiative also included organizing monthly neighborhood meetups. These weren't just social gatherings. They were forums to discuss concerns, share solutions, and celebrate community wins. We invited guest speakers, experts in mediation, community organizing, and even electrical safety to help educate residents. These meetings quickly became popular. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now sharing ideas and working together. The energy was contagious. At one meeting, a young couple brought up concerns about their elderly neighbor, who was struggling to maintain her property and keep up with bills. The discussion sparked a volunteer group to assist seniors and vulnerable residents. They helped with yard work, minor repairs, and sometimes just companionship. That group grew steadily, becoming a pillar of community care. Seeing neighbors support one another in ways small and large was deeply rewarding. It reminded me that community isn't just about rules or property, it's about people caring for people. While the Respect Starts Here initiative was gaining momentum, I also focused on educating myself further. I wanted to understand how entitlement develops and how communities can resist it effectively. I read books, listened to podcasts, and connected with community leaders across the country who had faced similar issues. One recurring theme stood out: entitlement often stems from insecurity, lack of empathy, and a sense of powerlessness. People who feel overlooked or marginalized sometimes lash out by claiming more than they should, or by breaking rules. Understanding this didn't excuse bad behavior, but it helped me approach conflicts with more compassion and strategic thinking. Instead of reacting with anger or defensiveness, I learned to engage calmly, set clear boundaries, and seek common ground when possible. This approach didn't work with everyone, Melissa being the prime example, but it transformed many interactions. I became known in the neighborhood not just as someone who stood firm, but as a peacemaker. That reputation brought new opportunities. Local organizations invited me to speak about my experience and share lessons learned. I was invited to panels on community resilience. Articles were written featuring my story, and I even started consulting with other neighborhoods struggling with similar conflicts. It felt surreal at times, but also deeply meaningful. From a frustrating, exhausting conflict grew a platform for positive change. One of the highlights was being asked to help design a conflict resolution workshop tailored for HOAs. The program focused on clear communication, understanding legal rights and responsibilities, and fostering empathy. It was designed to help boards and residents avoid the kind of escalation that had nearly torn my neighborhood apart. The workshops were a success. Participants reported feeling more equipped to handle disputes and more connected to their communities. Back home, the neighborhood continued to thrive. The earlier tension gave way to a genuine sense of partnership. New traditions emerged: seasonal potlucks, community gardening days, and safety patrols. We even started a neighborhood newsletter featuring resident stories, tips for respectful living, and updates on community projects. All of this built a stronger, more resilient fabric. But I never forgot how fragile that fabric had been. That's why I stayed vigilant. Every so often, a new issue would arise: a fence built too close to a property line, a noisy party, a pet left unattended. Instead of letting frustration build, we tackled problems early, with open dialogue and mutual respect. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. One of the most powerful reminders of how far we'd come came unexpectedly. A few months ago, a family moved into a house near mine. They were newcomers to the area, nervous about fitting in. On their first day, they came over to introduce themselves. We chatted about the neighborhood, the community groups, and the history of the place. They told me they'd heard about the earlier conflict but were encouraged by the positive changes. It was a full circle moment. From fear and division to hope and unity. I smiled, thinking about how far we'd all come. And I knew this story wasn't just about a stolen Tesla charge or a power dispute. It was about something deeper. About how communities can face tough challenges, hold each other accountable, and choose respect over entitlement. About how ordinary people can become agents of change. And about how the simple act of standing up, firmly, fairly, and compassionately, can light the way for others. Even as the neighborhood healed and grew stronger, the experience with Melissa left me with a deeper awareness. Entitlement doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's often rooted in something more complicated, insecurities, unmet needs, or even personal struggles that no one sees. Understanding that didn't excuse what she did, but it gave me a new perspective on the whole ordeal. I found myself thinking a lot about why some people act entitled and how communities can protect themselves without becoming hostile or judgmental. It's a delicate balance and not one that's easy to maintain. But I wanted to try. That's why, beyond organizing neighborhood watch programs and educational workshops, I started connecting with local social services and mental health groups. I wanted to learn how to spot warning signs and how to approach conflicts with empathy, not just anger. One day, a community liaison from the city invited me to join a roundtable discussion focused on preventing conflict in residential communities. The group included social workers, police officers, HOA leaders, and residents who had faced issues like mine. It was an eye-opening experience. Hearing from others who had dealt with entitlement in their own neighborhoods showed me that this was a widespread problem. But it also reinforced the idea that punitive measures alone aren't enough. Instead, the focus needed to be on prevention, communication, and support. We talked about creating accessible resources for residents who might be struggling, whether financially, mentally, or socially. How to build trust so neighbors feel safe reaching out before conflicts escalate. How to create systems where disputes are mediated early and fairly. I brought up my own experience with Melissa, the electricity theft, the harassment, the court battles, and how it had pushed me to take a hard line. But I also shared how understanding the roots of entitlement helped me navigate difficult moments with more calm and clarity. The roundtable inspired me to get involved in local advocacy. I volunteered with a nonprofit that offers mediation services and conflict resolution training for communities. I helped develop brochures and workshops that teach people how to set boundaries respectfully and recognize when someone might need help. Back in the neighborhood, these efforts started to bear fruit. We created a community resource guide that included information on mental health services, financial aid programs, and mediation contacts. HOA meetings became more welcoming and less adversarial. People felt comfortable bringing up issues without fear of retaliation or judgment. I even started a small newsletter column called Neighborly Notes, where I shared tips for respectful living, highlighted positive stories, and offered advice on handling tricky situations. Over time, the neighborhood became more than just a place to live. It became a community where people cared for each other and for the shared space we all called home. Of course, there were still bumps along the way. Entitlement didn't disappear overnight. There were occasional flare-ups, arguments over parking spots, noise complaints, or disagreements about landscaping rules. But the way we handled these issues had changed. Instead of escalating, people talked. They listened. They compromised. That shift was powerful. One memorable incident involved a family who was struggling financially and had let their yard fall into disrepair. Neighbors were frustrated, worried it would affect property values. Instead of complaining, we organized a neighborhood cleanup day to help. Volunteers showed up with tools, plants, and plenty of enthusiasm. The family was overwhelmed with gratitude. That simple act of kindness made a huge difference, not just for their property, but for the entire block. It reminded me how entitlement often comes from feeling isolated or unsupported. When people feel connected and cared for, they're less likely to act out. That lesson stuck with me. I also started reflecting on how I'd changed through this experience. I'd become more patient, more empathetic, and more willing to see beyond surface behavior. Standing up for my rights didn't mean shutting out others' struggles. It meant finding balance, being firm but fair, setting boundaries but offering support. I realized that's the essence of community, and it's something worth fighting for every day. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching neighbors chat and children play, I felt a deep sense of peace. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. No community ever is. But it was growing into something stronger because people chose respect over entitlement, connection over conflict. And that made all the difference. Even as the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, I realized that the story we lived through with Melissa had opened my eyes to something much larger than just stolen electricity or a Tesla charge. It exposed the fragile nature of trust, respect, and community, how easily those bonds can be stretched, frayed, or even broken by a single person's sense of entitlement. This realization led me to dive deeper into what makes neighborhoods strong, what breaks them apart, and how ordinary people can become the difference makers. I started by researching community dynamics, reading stories of neighborhoods across the country that faced similar challenges, whether it was conflict over property lines, parking disputes, noise complaints, or just plain old human selfishness. What struck me most was how common the problem was and how diverse the solutions could be. Some communities thrived because they created clear, fair rules and stuck to them. Others succeeded because they fostered a culture of kindness and communication. A few even transformed conflict into opportunity, turning disputes into moments of connection and growth. Inspired, I began to think about what could make my neighborhood not just safer, but truly resilient. Resilience, the ability to bounce back from hardship and grow stronger, became my new goal. It wasn't enough to just put out fires or patch up wounds. I wanted the neighborhood to build a foundation that would withstand future challenges, no matter what form they took. That meant focusing on relationships as much as rules. I reached out to neighbors more intentionally. I made a point to say hello, ask how they were doing, and listen. I invited people to coffee, to walk their dogs together, to participate in community projects. I noticed something powerful. When people feel seen and heard, they tend to behave better. It's as if respect begets respect. At the same time, I worked with the HOA to establish a community care committee. This group was tasked with checking in on vulnerable residents, organizing social events, and mediating disputes before they escalated. It was a way to combine structure with heart. The committee became a central part of our neighborhood life. We held barbecues, holiday parties, and even movie nights in the park. These events helped neighbors get to know each other beyond surface-level interactions. Conversations flowed more freely, and people began to appreciate the diversity and strengths within our community. Another important step was improving communication channels. We set up a neighborhood newsletter, both printed and digital, where residents could share news, ask questions, and highlight positive stories. We created a private online group moderated by volunteers to keep discussions respectful and focused. This transparency helped build trust and reduce rumors or misunderstandings. Through all this, I kept thinking about Melissa, not to dwell on the past, but to remind myself why these efforts mattered. Her sense of entitlement had nearly destroyed the sense of community we cherished. But by facing it head-on, we had a chance to rebuild something better. One of the biggest challenges we faced was changing the mindset around conflict. Many people naturally avoid confrontation or assume the worst about neighbors. That fear can lead to silence, resentment, or passive-aggressive behavior. We worked hard to teach healthier ways to communicate, using I statements, active listening, and seeking common ground. We brought in professional mediators to lead workshops, helping neighbors learn how to de-escalate situations. At first, some residents were skeptical, but over time, the approach gained traction. When disputes arose, people tried to talk directly and calmly before calling the HOA or authorities. That shift made a huge difference in preventing conflicts from spiraling. A few months after launching these initiatives, a particularly tense situation tested our progress. A new family moved in, and they brought a large dog that barked frequently. Several neighbors complained, tensions rose, and old fears about entitlement resurfaced. But instead of jumping into accusations, the Community Care Committee stepped in. We facilitated a meeting between the family and concerned neighbors, encouraging open, respectful dialogue. The dog owners explained they were working on training, and neighbors shared how the noise affected their routines. Together, they agreed on a plan to manage barking and check in regularly. That outcome felt like a victory, not just because the problem was solved, but because of how it was handled. It showed that with respect and communication, even tough issues can be resolved peacefully. Looking back, it amazed me how far we'd come from those early days of frustration and fear. The neighborhood had grown into a community where entitlement didn't have room to thrive, not because rules alone kept it out, but because people cared enough to listen, support, and hold each other accountable. This transformation wasn't about perfection. There were still occasional disagreements and challenges. But the culture had changed. People were willing to work through difficulties together, rather than against one another. On a personal level, this journey reshaped how I approached relationships. I became more patient, more empathetic, and more willing to forgive small mistakes. I learned that setting boundaries doesn't mean building walls. It means creating space where respect can grow. The experience also deepened my belief in the power of ordinary people. None of the changes happened overnight or because of a single hero. They happened because neighbors chose to act, to show up, speak up, and care. That collective effort made all the difference. As I write this, sitting on my porch with the sun setting behind the trees, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, the challenges faced, and the people who stood by me. I know the story isn't over. There will always be new conflicts, new challenges. But I'm confident that our neighborhood is ready. Because we've built something stronger than fences or rules. We've built trust. And that's the real power of community. Living through the whole ordeal with Melissa and the electricity theft wasn't just a battle over power, it was a battle for the soul of our neighborhood. And it forced me to rethink everything I thought I knew about community, entitlement, and human nature. After the dust settled and the neighborhood started to heal, I realized how much deeper the problem of entitlement really was. It wasn't just about one person taking electricity to charge a Tesla. It was about a mindset, a belief that you can take whatever you want, whenever you want, without regard for others. And that mindset can spread like a virus if it's left unchecked. I started paying closer attention to the dynamics around me, not just here, but in other communities too. Everywhere I looked, I saw people pushing boundaries, expecting special treatment, or simply ignoring rules that everyone else had to follow. Sometimes it was small things, someone parking in a spot reserved for others, loud parties late at night, or leaving trash out after pickup day. Other times, it was more serious, vandalism, harassment, or even legal battles over property rights. What struck me was how entitlement often masks insecurity or a lack of respect. People acting entitled often feel powerless in other parts of their lives, so they try to claim control or superiority in the community. That's not an excuse, but it helped me understand Melissa's behavior a little more and how to respond more effectively in the future. Instead of just confronting entitlement with anger or punishment, I started thinking about prevention and healing. How can we build communities that discourage entitlement before it takes root? How can we create environments where respect is the norm, not the exception? I reached out to experts, community leaders, and even psychologists to learn more. I joined online forums and local groups dedicated to community building and conflict resolution. I discovered tools and strategies that help neighbors communicate better, set clear expectations, and support each other. One approach that resonated with me was restorative justice. Instead of focusing solely on punishment, it encourages people who cause harm to understand the impact of their actions and work to repair the damage. It's about accountability paired with empathy. Inspired by this, I proposed a restorative justice program for our HOA. It wasn't easy to get everyone on board at first. Some residents just wanted strict enforcement and fines. But gradually, more people saw the value in dialogue and healing. We set up a mediation team made up of trained volunteers from the neighborhood. When disputes arose, the team stepped in to facilitate conversations, helping parties understand each other and find solutions that worked for everyone. This process helped reduce tension and rebuild trust. People felt heard instead of punished. Conflicts that could have escalated into lawsuits or bitterness were resolved peacefully. At the same time, I kept organizing community events that brought people together in positive ways. Potlucks, garden days, movie nights, and holiday celebrations created spaces where neighbors could bond beyond complaints and conflicts. These gatherings showed me the power of connection. When people feel part of something bigger, they're more likely to act with kindness and respect. One memorable moment was a summer block party where Melissa unexpectedly showed up. She was quieter than before, kept to herself, and even helped set up tables. No one pressured her, but the atmosphere had shifted enough that she felt welcome. It wasn't a total turnaround, but it was progress. I also focused on educating neighbors, especially younger residents, about the importance of respect, community values, and civic responsibility. We held workshops at the local community center where kids and teens could learn about boundaries, communication, and the impact of entitlement. It was encouraging to see the next generation embracing these lessons. They asked thoughtful questions, shared their own experiences, and showed genuine care for their neighbors. It gave me hope that the cycle of entitlement could be broken. Throughout this journey, I documented everything. I kept a journal of events, conversations, and lessons learned. I shared stories anonymously on community boards and blogs to spread awareness. Some neighbors started sharing their own experiences too, creating a network of support and knowledge. Looking back, I see that the conflict with Melissa was a catalyst, a painful but necessary wake-up call. It forced me to grow as a person, as a neighbor, and as a community leader. It taught me that entitlement is more than just bad behavior. It's a challenge to the very fabric of community life. But it also taught me that communities are resilient. With effort, empathy, and courage, we can rebuild trust and create spaces where everyone feels valued. Today, the neighborhood is stronger than ever. We have systems in place to handle conflicts early, resources to support residents in need, and a culture that celebrates respect and connection. And while challenges will always arise, we face them together. That's the real power we discovered. Because at the end of the day, community isn't just where you live. It's how you live, with others, for others, and sometimes despite others. And that's a lesson I won't forget. After everything that had happened, I started to realize how fragile community really is. The electricity theft was just one spark, but it revealed a much bigger problem. Entitlement isn't always loud or obvious. It often hides in small acts that slowly chip away at trust and respect. And once that starts happening, it can spread quickly. I began paying close attention to the neighborhood, looking for those small signs. Things like neighbors leaving trash out early, ignoring parking rules, or loud parties that went late into the night. On their own, these might seem minor, but taken together, they started to create a feeling of division and frustration. It became clear that preventing these issues was about more than rules or penalties. It was about culture, the way people treat each other day in and day out. So, I set out to help build a culture of respect and accountability. I knew it wouldn't happen overnight, and it would require effort from all of us. But I was determined. I started by organizing regular neighborhood meetups. Not just formal HOA meetings, but casual get-togethers like block parties, potlucks, and game nights. The goal was to give people a chance to connect, to know each other as friends rather than just neighbors. When you know someone's story, it's harder to ignore their feelings or dismiss their concerns. At these gatherings, I encouraged open conversation. We talked about what we each valued in the neighborhood and what we wanted to change. People shared frustrations, but also ideas for solutions. One thing that came up again and again was the importance of communication. Many conflicts started simply because neighbors didn't talk to each other directly. They'd let problems fester or rely on rumors. To address this, we created a community newsletter and an online forum. The newsletter included positive stories, reminders about neighborhood rules, and tips for being a good neighbor. The online forum gave people a safe space to ask questions, report issues, or offer help. Both tools helped improve transparency and trust. At the same time, I worked with the HOA board to clarify and enforce basic rules fairly and consistently. This wasn't about being strict for the sake of it, but about setting clear expectations everyone could agree on. We updated guidelines around parking, noise, and shared spaces. We made sure new residents received a welcome packet explaining these rules and community values. But rules alone weren't enough. I realized that some residents might act entitled because they felt disconnected or unsupported. So we started a volunteer program to check in on neighbors who might be struggling, whether with health issues, financial problems, or just feeling isolated. Volunteers would help with errands, yard work, or just drop by for a chat. This program grew quickly and made a big difference. People appreciated the sense of care and belonging. Another important step was education. We invited local experts to lead workshops on conflict resolution, communication skills, and even financial literacy. These sessions gave residents tools to handle disputes calmly and effectively. We also held classes for kids and teens to teach respect, empathy, and community responsibility from a young age. The impact was clear. Disputes were resolved faster and with less bitterness. Neighbors were more willing to listen and compromise. Even the HOA board reported smoother meetings and more constructive participation. Of course, not every problem disappeared. Sometimes tensions still flared, especially when new residents moved in or when resources were tight. But the community had learned to respond differently. Instead of letting conflicts escalate, we addressed them early and with empathy. One example stands out. A new family moved in and brought a large dog that barked constantly. Some neighbors were upset, but instead of demanding the dog be removed, the Community Care Committee arranged a meeting between the family and concerned residents. They discussed training plans and agreed on quiet hours. The family followed through, and neighbors appreciated their efforts. That experience showed me how much had changed. We'd moved from confrontation to cooperation. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Reflecting on the journey, I saw how much I had grown personally as well. The conflict with Melissa forced me to develop patience, empathy, and resilience. I learned to stand firm when necessary, but also to listen and seek understanding. I became more aware of the complexities behind entitlement and how to address it constructively. And I realized the importance of leadership. Sometimes it takes one person willing to step up and keep pushing for respect and kindness to make a difference. But real change happens when everyone chooses to participate. Today, the neighborhood feels different. There's still the occasional disagreement, but it's handled with more grace and less anger. Neighbors greet each other on the street. People look out for one another. We celebrate successes together and face challenges as a team. I'm proud of what we've built. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Because it's a community that refuses to let entitlement win. And because it shows that respect isn't just a rule, it's a choice we make every day. As time passed, I kept noticing something important. When people feel connected and valued, entitlement starts to fade away. It's like the opposite of loneliness or frustration. When neighbors care about each other, they think twice before crossing boundaries. They remember that their actions affect real people, not just faceless addresses. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when Mrs. Jenkins from down the street came over with a basket of freshly baked cookies. She smiled warmly and said, "You know, I never thought I'd feel this connected to a neighborhood before. It's different here. People actually care." Her words stuck with me, because for so long, the neighborhood felt divided and tense. Now it was feeling like home again. This wasn't magic. It was hard work and a lot of listening. I began meeting with neighbors one-on-one more often just to check in. Sometimes people wanted to vent about frustrations, other times they wanted advice, or simply to share a story. These conversations taught me a lot about what made people tick and how small kindnesses could turn the tide. For example, I learned about Jim, a quiet man who kept to himself after his wife passed away. Many thought he was standoffish, but after I reached out and invited him to our next potluck, I discovered he was lonely and hesitant to connect. Now, he's a regular at community events and even volunteers to help with gardening projects. Or Sarah, a young mom who struggled with noisy neighbors late at night. Instead of getting angry, she came to a committee meeting to discuss solutions. We helped her communicate calmly with the neighbors, and they agreed to keep it down during certain hours. Peace was restored and relationships improved. I realized that entitlement often comes from feeling unheard or powerless. When people are listened to and treated with respect, they respond in kind. At the same time, I worked with the HOA board to tighten up security and infrastructure. We installed better lighting along pathways, fixed broken fences, and added surveillance cameras in common areas. These measures helped reduce vandalism and petty theft, which also lowered tensions. But the most meaningful changes were social. We created a buddy system where new residents were paired with established neighbors to help them adjust. This simple act helped newcomers feel welcome and informed about community expectations. We also launched a monthly Good Neighbor Award to recognize residents who went above and beyond. It was a small gesture but boosted morale and encouraged positive behavior. All these efforts created a positive feedback loop. Respect bred respect, kindness inspired kindness, and slowly but surely, the culture of entitlement lost its grip. Of course, challenges didn't disappear overnight. There were still occasional flare-ups, disputes over parking, complaints about noise, or misunderstandings about HOA rules. But now, the neighborhood had tools to address these issues constructively. One particularly tricky situation involved a resident who repeatedly ignored the community's landscaping guidelines. His yard became an eyesore, and neighbors were frustrated. Instead of escalating to fines immediately, the Community Care Committee reached out with empathy, offering help and resources. We connected him with a local volunteer gardening group who assisted in restoring the yard. The man was grateful, apologized for the neglect, and became a more engaged neighbor. That moment felt like a win for the whole community, not just because a problem was solved, but because it was done with compassion. It reminded me how important it is to balance accountability with understanding. This philosophy guided us as we continued building our neighborhood into a place where everyone could thrive. Beyond local efforts, I also started speaking at community conferences and writing about our experience. I wanted to share the lessons we learned, the pitfalls of entitlement, the power of connection, and practical ways communities can build resilience. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the country reached out, sharing their own stories and asking for advice. It became clear that entitlement is a widespread issue, but it's one that can be tackled with the right approach. In my talks and articles, I emphasized 3 key points. Communication is everything. When neighbors talk openly and respectfully, problems can be solved before they escalate. Empathy matters. Understanding where someone is coming from helps defuse tension and find common ground.
Community is a choice.
It requires ongoing effort and commitment from everyone to create a culture of respect. These ideas resonated deeply with audiences. I also worked on creating a toolkit, a simple guide for neighborhoods struggling with entitlement issues. It included templates for welcome packets, conflict resolution tips, community building activities, and more. The goal was to empower residents to take charge of their communities in positive ways. Back home, the neighborhood continued to flourish. Children played safely in the streets again. Adults enjoyed evening walks without worry. Neighbors gathered regularly, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to connect. Melissa's shadow faded into the past, replaced by a brighter, more hopeful future. I often think about how close we came to losing that, how one person's selfish actions almost tore us apart. But instead, they became the catalyst for change. That's the paradox of entitlement. It can destroy, but it can also inspire growth if we respond with courage and compassion. Looking ahead, I know there will be new challenges. Communities are living things, full of complexities and contradictions. But I'm confident that with the foundation we've built, we can face whatever comes next together. Because true community isn't about perfect neighbors or flawless rules. It's about people choosing to respect, support, and care for one another day after day. And that's the story I want to keep telling. One of the biggest lessons I learned from this whole experience is how much entitlement can hide behind silence. Before Melissa's Tesla charging stunt, there were plenty of little things going on, quiet frustrations, small rule breaking, subtle disregard for community standards, that no one really spoke up about. People assumed someone else would handle it or that it wasn't a big deal. But those small, unchecked acts added up, slowly eroding trust. When Melissa started stealing electricity, it was a loud wake-up call. Suddenly, the neighborhood couldn't ignore the problem anymore. It exposed how entitlement, left to fester in the shadows, could grow into something bigger and more damaging. That made me realize, silence is the enemy of community. If neighbors don't talk openly about concerns or set boundaries early, problems multiply. But confrontation doesn't have to mean conflict. It can be the first step toward understanding and change. So I made it my mission to break the silence, one conversation at a time. I encouraged neighbors to speak up, not in anger or blame, but with curiosity and care. To ask questions, share feelings, and listen without judgment. This simple shift changed everything. People started having honest talks about what mattered to them and how behaviors affected the neighborhood. One neighbor told me she'd been quietly frustrated for months about cars blocking her driveway, but didn't want to seem nosy. After our conversation, she felt empowered to address it calmly with the HOA and the car owners. The issue was resolved quickly, and relationships remained intact. Another neighbor shared that she felt overwhelmed by noisy parties late into the night, but feared retaliation if she complained. Together, we found a way for her to communicate concerns anonymously through the HOA, which opened dialogue without direct conflict. These stories showed me how much fear and hesitation keep entitlement alive. When people don't feel safe to speak, bad behavior goes unchecked. By building a culture where voices were heard and respected, entitlement lost its power. At the same time, I realized that some entitlement comes from lack of awareness. People sometimes don't realize how their actions impact others. Maybe they grew up in different communities with different norms, or they're dealing with stresses that make them less mindful. Education became another focus. We developed simple guides explaining community expectations, why certain rules exist, and how following them benefits everyone. We distributed these in welcome packets and posted them online in friendly, easy-to-understand language. Workshops on communication skills, empathy, and conflict resolution helped residents learn tools to navigate tricky situations. This combination of awareness and communication created a shared understanding, a social contract that everyone bought into. One particularly memorable workshop was on walking in each other's shoes, where neighbors paired up and shared personal stories about their daily lives and challenges. This exercise built empathy and reminded us all that behind every door was a complex human being with hopes, struggles, and dreams. It shifted perspectives and softened attitudes. I also noticed that when people felt included and valued, entitlement dropped sharply. So, creating opportunities for participation became key. We invited residents to volunteer on committees, help plan events, or just pitch in with small neighborhood projects. This sense of ownership and belonging made a huge difference. People who once stayed silent now spoke up with ideas and solutions. They celebrated each other's successes and supported those in need. That collective spirit was the antidote to entitlement. Of course, it wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks and frustrations along the way. Some residents resisted change or tried to bend rules to their advantage. Occasionally, conflicts flared. But by focusing on dialogue, empathy, and consistent standards, the community weathered these storms. Even Melissa's case offered lessons. While her actions were clearly wrong, some neighbors later shared they suspected she was struggling with personal issues, feeling isolated and overwhelmed. Understanding that didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped the community approach her situation with more nuance. In fact, the HOA arranged for support services to reach out, showing that even those who cross lines deserve help. This balanced approach of accountability and compassion strengthened bonds. Over time, the neighborhood transformed. The energy shifted from suspicion and division to trust and collaboration. People looked out for one another, not because of rules or enforcement, but because of genuine care. This transformation reminded me of something simple but profound. Community is a living, breathing thing. It requires tending, attention, and love. And it starts with each of us choosing to act with kindness and respect. That's the legacy I hope to leave, not just in this neighborhood, but everywhere. Because entitlement isn't unique to any place. It shows up in cities and suburbs, rich and poor, big and small. But so does the potential for connection, healing, and growth. Every community has the power to choose its story, to decide if entitlement will rule or if respect and empathy will prevail. I'm grateful to have witnessed and helped write a new chapter in ours. And I believe that, together, we can keep turning the page toward a better future. After everything we went through, I kept thinking about the real impact this whole saga had, not just on the neighborhood, but on me personally. It changed the way I see community and what it takes to truly live in harmony with others. More than that, it showed me that problems like entitlement aren't just obstacles to overcome, they're invitations to grow. One thing that stuck with me is how easily entitlement can sneak into any place, even the most well-meaning community. It thrives on assumptions that rules don't apply to me, that my needs come before others, or that I'm entitled to special treatment. But entitlement doesn't live in a vacuum. It grows when communication breaks down and empathy dries up. What we did was reverse that. We rebuilt bridges, one conversation, one kind act, one shared smile at a time. Looking back, I see how important it was to treat everyone involved as human beings. That includes Melissa, who made a bad choice but also was struggling in ways no one saw at first. It means holding people accountable, yes, but with fairness and compassion. That balance is tricky, but it's the foundation of lasting community. We learn to listen more than we talk, to ask questions instead of assuming the worst, to offer help before judgment, and to remember that respect is earned by giving it first. I also realized that no one person can fix everything alone. It took many neighbors stepping up, volunteering their time, sharing ideas, supporting one another to turn things around. That collective effort created momentum that carried us through tough moments. The neighborhood became a living example of how ordinary people, when united by common values, can create extraordinary change. Beyond the physical fixes like better lighting or clearer rules, it was the emotional work that mattered most. Healing old wounds, building trust, and fostering belonging. That's what made the difference. And it's why I believe this story matters. Because entitlement isn't just about stolen electricity or broken rules. It's about how we choose to treat each other. It's about whether we see neighbors as competitors, obstacles, or partners in creating a better life. The choice is ours every day. This experience also pushed me to reflect on my own actions. How often do I assume I'm right without listening? How often do I put my convenience above others? It's easy to criticize entitlement in others, but harder to examine it in ourselves. Community work is a mirror. It shows you who you really are and challenges you to grow. I'm far from perfect, but I'm committed to doing better. Because I want to live in a world where respect and kindness aren't exceptions but the norm. Where people look out for one another, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. Where communities are safe, welcoming, and full of life. As for Melissa, she moved away a while ago. I hope she's found peace and balance in her life. Before she left, she did something that surprised me. She thanked the neighborhood for giving her a chance to change, even when she didn't always deserve it. That moment felt like a full circle, a reminder that people can grow if we give them space to do so. Today, the neighborhood thrives. Children laugh in the streets, neighbors chat over fences, and people genuinely care. The shadow of entitlement still flickers sometimes, but it's no match for the light we built together. I share this story because I believe it can help others. If you're dealing with entitlement or conflict in your community, know that change is possible. Start with a conversation. Listen more than you speak. Offer kindness before criticism. And remember, community is not just a place, it's a commitment. A daily choice to respect, support, and uplift one another. That's the power we discovered, and the power that can transform any neighborhood. So, whatever challenges you face, hold on to hope. Because together, we can build communities where everyone belongs. And that's worth fighting for.